A former housekeeper at Buckingham Palace has described Prince Andrew's treatment of junior staff as the worst she ever witnessed in 15 years of royal service. Speaking to royal author Tom Quinn, the woman, who requested anonymity, said Andrew regularly reduced young housemaids to tears. She claims he would inspect their work with what she described as military precision, then berate them loudly if anything was out of place by even an inch. These are not isolated complaints. They form part of a growing collection of first-hand accounts from people who worked for, protected, or served Andrew Mountbatten Windsor during his decades as a senior royal. What connects these testimonies is consistency. The same behavior patterns appear across different settings, different years, and different witnesses who never met each other. This latest account adds specific detail to what many royal watchers have suspected for years. According to the former housekeeper, Andrew had a particular obsession with how his teddy bears were arranged on his bed. She said there were approximately 72 stuffed toys that had to be positioned in a very specific way each morning. If they were wrong, he would notice immediately, and he would make his displeasure known. The housekeeper described one incident where a new maid accidentally placed one bear on the wrong pillow. Andrew allegedly called her into his suite and subjected her to what the housekeeper called a dressing down that lasted nearly 10 minutes. The young woman left the room in tears and requested a transfer within the week. What makes this account particularly notable is the source. Tom Quinn has interviewed dozens of former royal staff over the years. He has written extensively about palace life and has built a reputation for careful documentation. The accounts he publishes are typically corroborated by multiple sources and cross-referenced against known timelines. This is not tabloid gossip. This is pattern documentation. Another former staff member, Paul Kidd, who worked in the royal household during the 1990s, has spoken about Andrew's expectations regarding food. Kidd told reporters that Andrew insisted meals be served at exact temperatures. If soup was too cool or meat was overdone by even a minute, he would send the entire plate back and demand it be redone. But it wasn't just the rejection of food that bothered staff. It was the manner in which he did it. Kidd recalled Andrew once throwing a menu across the room when he discovered a particular vintage of wine was unavailable. No apology was offered to the staff member who had to pick it up. No acknowledgement that the behavior was inappropriate. According to Kidd, Andrew simply expected people to absorb his frustrations without complaint. That expectation, former staff say, extended to physical space. Multiple accounts describe Andrew as territorial about palace corridors and common areas. He reportedly expected staff to step aside when he approached and would make comments if they didn't move quickly enough. One former footman, speaking to the Daily Mail in 2022, said Andrew once told him to know your place after the footman accidentally made eye contact while passing him in a hallway. The phrase stuck with him for years. What emerges from these accounts is not just rudeness. It's a worldview. A belief system in which Andrew genuinely saw himself as fundamentally different from the people who worked for him. Not just higher in rank, but different in kind. That belief, according to those who witnessed it, shaped every interaction. Royal protection officers and it went unchallenged to remain invisible. Don't go anywhere. They see everything. What we're about to reveal will show you just how deep this pattern of behavior runs. Former bodyguard only now being fully exposed, spoke publicly about Andrew's behavior. It broke an unwritten code. Protection officers don't typically discuss the royals they guard. The fact that Worf did so speaks volumes about what he witnessed. Worf described Andrew as someone who viewed security personnel as servants rather than professionals. He said Andrew would frequently change plans without notice, expecting his protection team to adapt instantly regardless of safety protocols or logistics. On one occasion, Worf recalled, Andrew decided to drive himself to an event rather than use the arranged car and driver. He refused to wait for the protection vehicle to reposition. He simply left, forcing his security team to scramble and catch up. This wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. Protection protocols exist for a reason. When a principal refuses to follow them, they put not only themselves at risk, but also the officers tasked with keeping them safe. Worf said Andrew never seemed to consider that. Another protection officer, who spoke to the Times on condition of anonymity, described Andrew as dismissive of security advice. The officer said Andrew once insisted on taking a particular route through London that security had advised against due to traffic and exposure concerns. When the officer raised the issue, Andrew allegedly responded, "I'll decide where I go. You just follow." The officer followed, but he never forgot the contempt in Andrew's voice. Beyond security personnel, Andrew's behavior toward police officers has been documented in multiple incidents. In 2002, he was stopped for speeding in a 40 miles per hour zone near Windsor. The officer who pulled him over expected to issue a standard ticket. Instead, Andrew refused to exit the vehicle. He sat in the driver's seat while his protection officer dealt with the police. According to later reports, Andrew eventually emerged from the car and said he was in a hurry. The ticket was never issued. No points were added to his license. No fine was paid. In 2010, a more serious incident occurred. Andrew was reportedly speeding into Buckingham Palace when he struck a police officer stationed at the gate. The officer suffered an arm injury and filed an official complaint. Metropolitan Police reviewed the incident. No action was taken. The officer's complaint was quietly closed, and Andrew faced no consequences. The incident became another example of what former staff describe as a pattern of behavior insulated from accountability by institutional protection. But protection wasn't limited to legal matters. It extended to social situations as well. Society journalist Petronella Wyatt, who encountered Andrew at multiple high society events during the 1990s, said his behavior at private gatherings was often inappropriate. She described him as dominating conversations, talking over others, and making jokes that were, in her words, better suited to a boarding school dormitory than a dinner party. Wyatt said Andrew seemed genuinely unaware of how he was perceived. She compared his lack of self-awareness to a historical monarch who believed in divine right. At one dinner party, she recalled, Andrew spent 20 minutes lecturing the table about trade policy despite several guests attempting to change the subject. When one guest finally succeeded in redirecting the conversation, Andrew appeared irritated and largely stopped speaking. Wyatt's account is consistent with observations from others who moved in similar circles. A recurring theme is Andrew's inability to read social cues or adjust his behavior based on feedback. Some attributed this to arrogance, others suggested it was deeper than that, a fundamental belief that feedback didn't apply to him. That belief extended to physical space and personal boundaries. Multiple accounts describe Andrew as invading personal space, standing too close, touching people's arms or shoulders during conversation, without invitation. One former guest at Royal Lodge, speaking to Tatler magazine, said Andrew had a habit of putting his hand on women's lower backs when guiding them through doorways. The gesture, the guest said, always lasted a moment too long. It wasn't overtly aggressive, but it wasn't comfortable either. These accounts, taken together, paint a picture of someone who spent decades operating without the normal social constraints that govern most people's behavior. Rank provided insulation. Status provided protection, and Andrew, according to those who witnessed it, took full advantage. Stay tuned. The final section reveals how these decades of behavior connect to the much darker scandal that has now consumed his reputation entirely. Here's what nobody talks about when discussing Andrew's downfall. The behavior was always visible, the rudeness toward staff, the dismissiveness toward security, the reckless driving, the inappropriate jokes, the violation of personal space. None of it was hidden. People saw it. People documented it. People complained about it, and for decades, nothing happened. The reason these accounts are emerging now isn't because the behavior has changed. It's because the protection has disappeared. Andrew no longer holds royal titles. He no longer performs public duties. He no longer enjoys the institutional shield that once kept complaints from becoming consequences. That shield didn't fall overnight. It eroded gradually, beginning with the disastrous Newsnight interview in 2019 and collapsing entirely after the civil lawsuit filed by Virginia Giuffre in 2021. But the erosion revealed something that had been there all along. A pattern of behavior built on entitlement, enabled by status, and tolerated by an institution that prioritized reputation over accountability. Royal biographer Andrew Lownie, who has extensively researched Andrew's life, writes in his book entitled that the difference between Andrew and other royals was stark. Lownie interviewed former staff who worked for multiple members of the family. They consistently described King Charles as treating staff with respect, even referring to them as companions rather than employees. The Queen Mother was known for remembering staff birthdays and asking about their families. Andrew, by contrast, was described as treating staff as interchangeable and invisible. One housekeeper told Lownie that Andrew never once asked her name despite passing her in corridors multiple times per week for over 2 years. That absence of basic courtesy wasn't just rude. It was dehumanizing, and it reflected a worldview that, according to those who witnessed it, extended far beyond how he treated staff. It shaped how he viewed everyone outside his immediate social class. The recent release of Epstein-related documents has added explosive new context to that worldview. Emails from 2001 show someone at Balmoral asking Ghislaine Maxwell about finding new inappropriate friends. That language, combined with photographs showing Andrew in informal settings with Maxwell and others connected to Epstein's circle, raises questions that go far beyond rudeness. At the same time, reports have surfaced about items found after parties Andrew hosted at royal residences. According to royal commentators citing palace sources, some of these items were described as sex-related accessories. These details contradict earlier characterizations of Andrew's social gatherings as innocent shooting weekends. They suggest something far more troubling. When combined with decades of documented entitlement, dismissiveness toward women, and refusal to respect boundaries, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. This is not about a single mistake. This is about a lifetime of behavior that was enabled, protected, and excused by an institution that valued stability over accountability. And now that the institution has stepped back, that behavior is being seen clearly for the first time. Andrew reportedly continues to behave the same way inside Royal Lodge. Sources say staff still address him as Your Royal Highness. He still expects his teddy bears arranged in precise order. He still barks orders and shows little regard for those around him, but the world outside Royal Lodge has changed. The public no longer sees him as a prince unfairly targeted. They see him as a man who spent decades treating people with contempt and who, when finally faced with accountability, chose defiance over reflection. King Charles has made it clear that Andrew's time at Royal Lodge is ending. Security has been downgraded. Funding has been reduced. The June eviction deadline is firm, and when Andrew finally leaves, it will mark the end of more than just his residence. It will mark the end of an era in which rank alone was enough to insulate someone from consequences. The staff who spoke out, the protection officers who broke their silence, the witnesses who shared their accounts. They didn't bring Andrew down. Andrew did that himself. They just made sure everyone saw it. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think justice will ever be served? Do you believe people like Andrew can ever change? And should the institution that protected him for so long be held accountable as well?